Now I would like to go ahead and pass the presentation over to Jacqueline. Thank you, Jacqueline.
Thank you, Josh. Hi, and thank you for joining today's webinar. I'm really feeling grateful to be able to present on this topic. We often talk about sexual assault, but we don't talk as much about the impact on the secondary survivors. And we know that there is a ripple effect when someone has experienced a sexual assault. Sexual assault doesn't just impact that individual, but it impacts their social support system and the community at large, and ultimately the way the community and their social support system responds to them either mitigates or exacerbates the impact of the trauma. So I'm just really grateful to have the opportunity to talk about this today. My name is Jackie Amat. I am the Director of Client Services at the Blue Bench. The Blue Bench is Denver's only sexual assault prevention and care center. I'll talk a little bit later in a little bit about some of our other services, but I've been at the organization for about 6 years. So I oversee all our client services, which is basically our advocacy and therapy programming. And I've been in this field for over 20 years, working with children and families, crisis, and particularly trauma as a whole. So I'm eager to get started. And I'm having technical difficulties. 1 second, I'm already having technical difficulties. I'm not able to move my slide, Josh.
Try clicking on your PowerPoint screen and it may...
Oh, there it goes, thank you. So today I'm looking to cover a brief overview of our services at the Blue Bench, a little bit about how we in particular support secondary survivors, the impact that a sexual assault has on those secondary survivors, get an understanding of what their needs are, and how we provide information and guidance to them, and ultimately how we can help them support the survivor, and in order to do that, help them support themselves. Those are the points that I hope to cover today, but I do want to give you all an opportunity to type in anything else that you were hoping to hear about today, and then in a little bit I'll check back in to see if there's anything else that I missed that would be important to cover. So the Blue Bench, our mission at the Blue Bench is to eliminate sexual assault and diminish the impact it has on individuals, their loved ones, and their community through comprehensive issue advocacy, prevention, and care. So that's our overall mission statement. We've been in business for about 34 years, and we've grown quite a bit over the years, and we have a variety of different programming to cover lots of different components of this issue. So we do go out in the community and try to reach as many people as we can. We do that through our door-to-door canvassing, and we hit Denver and the 8 surrounding counties to really raise awareness about the issue of sexual assault, to let people know about our organization and in general about services that may be available to survivors of sexual assault. We also do fundraise through these efforts, and we get quite a few volunteers by being out in the community, which helps us provide the array of services that we have to offer. We have some extensive prevention and education programming. So I always say we'll pretty much go anywhere that anyone will have us. We really want to be able to talk about this issue and have the conversation going and really help people understand it, raise awareness, and find ways to intervene. The list here is some of our specific programming. I won't go through each of those, just to know that we have an array of different programming. A lot of what we do is geared towards youth. So we work with individuals from middle school through college and provide a lot of different age-appropriate programming for those youth. And a lot of it is about bringing in the bystander and getting other people involved and intervening in this issue. But we are at a lot of different places, including in the bars, including in the prison system. So we're sort of wherever people will have us. And in client services is the program that I oversee. So we have our 24-hour crisis hotline, our 24-hour hospital advocacy program. Our 24-hour hotline is really for anyone who's been impacted in any way by sexual assault. Our hospital advocacy is a service for recent survivors, so we can go out and meet them at the hospital and help them navigate the system early in their process. We have ongoing case management services that can work with them ongoingly, because it can be a really complex process. And then we have a variety of different counseling services. We have individual therapy, which can be short or long-term, a variety of different group therapy, and then specifically for secondary survivors, we have a Someone I Love workshop, which is a 3-hour workshop, and then we have our secondary survivor support group. So that's just a quick overview of our services. I just want to check back in to see if there was anything else that anyone had indicated that they want to make sure I cover before I go on.
Nothing at this time, Jackie.
Okay, great. So first of all, I want to talk about why this is an important subject. We know that research has indicated that how people respond to someone who's been impacted by trauma can have greater positive or negative impact on them than the trauma itself at times. So if someone responds positively to a survivor, they're more likely to have a better healing and recovery process. And if someone responds negatively to them, it's going to impact them more deeply. So it's often the response more than the trauma that has the impact. We've also learned that often survivors experience negative responses from those closest to them. There's various reasons for that, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. But the reason why this is such an important subject is because the importance of this population and the importance that they can provide in someone's healing process is often the very same people that provide a negative response. So it kind of contradicts what the needs are. And this is some research that was done by the Women's Health Project through DU and Anda Prince. And these are a couple points that they found were really significant through their research. So in responding to disclosures of violence, friends and loved ones can help survivors by emphasizing tangible help and emotional support, and minimize victim blaming, taking control, and treating survivors differently. So again, it's just really important, the role that they play. And the second point of this sort of reiterates what I said before about how, unfortunately, the response has been that it's often a negative response that they get from those that are most important to them. So this sort of emphasizes a little bit why this is an important subject matter. I also want to take a moment, if you do have questions as you go, please type in those questions as you go, and I'll stop at a couple points along the way to take those questions and provide any answers to those questions. So supporting secondary survivors, at the Blue Bench, we think of some of their more immediate needs as well as some of their ongoing needs. So some of the immediate needs we might provide through our hotline or through a hospital response. If we're meeting people in the hospital, they may have friends, families, loved ones with them. Secondary survivors can call our hotline. And some of the immediate needs is really to sort of empathize with their experience, to really recognize and honor the fact that they too could be impacted by the situation, to really be empathetic. They also could be really activated, and we want to provide whatever crisis intervention is needed to help respond to their emotions in that moment and help regulate them so that they can kind of help problem solve and be an advocate and a support for their survivor. They may need information about what to expect and what to do next and specific guidance. I'll talk about each of these a little bit more as we go. But then some of the ongoing support that we might provide might be through our case management program, through our workshop, and through the groups that we have. So again, we might really be validating their experience and normalizing what they're going through, and giving them permission to also be impacted by the situation. Providing them with some specific psychoeducation can really help them reframe what's happening, understand what's happening, and then use that information to support their survivor. And a big piece of that is understanding the impact of trauma so that they can understand what their loved one might be going through. The legal system can be really complex, so helping them navigate that and helping their loved one navigate that can be really important. And then to make sense of everything that happened and ultimately to take care of themselves in the midst of this is some of the ongoing support that we provide. So some of the impacts that we see on secondary survivors is they may experience a lot of guilt. They may have felt that they should have been able to protect their loved ones. This may come up more specifically with parents, but it can also come up with partners and even friends if you're out with your friends. But really feeling guilt that you could have prevented it or could have done something differently to intervene. So they may hold a lot of that guilt. Fear may come in a lot of different ways. Being aware of what's happened to someone they love may make them more afraid of what's likely to happen in the world to themselves or to anyone else they may love. It makes it more real. The reality of this situation becomes more real, and they can become more frightened for their own safety or for the safety of others that they love or for the ongoing safety of their loved ones. They also may be really angry. They may be angry at the perpetrator, particularly if it's someone that is known to the family or to the system, the support system. They may be really angry at the survivor, thinking that the survivor should have done things differently to help to have prevented this from happening. We'll talk more about why that's not the case, but they may be fueled with a lot of anger. They may not know what else to do or where to channel their feelings. They may feel completely out of control. They don't know how to help. They wish they could have done something different to prevent. And they're just feeling a lack of control in terms of what to do or how to help. And with that, some confusion, not really understanding how this could have happened, particularly, again, if it's within a system of people who know one another, to be really confused about how someone can treat someone this way may be really confusing. The survivor's behavior may be really confusing. There could be a lot of different elements that are confusing to them. And they also may have some of their own trauma, and that kind of gets kicked up when they hear about someone else that they care about being sexually assaulted and experiencing a trauma. Their own stuff can get kicked up. So some of the ways they therefore might respond is they may not believe the survivor. And sometimes it's hard to believe that these things happen in our world. And sometimes by not believing, we keep the illusion of safety alive. So they may not believe it because if they believe it, then they have to be aware of the dangers in the world that make them feel unsafe. And they just may also, like I said, be confused about what happened, and it's easier to not believe than believing sometimes. They also may not understand how things could have happened the way they did. They want to know why. Why did this happen? Why did you do this? Why did they do this? And they may ask a lot of why questions in order to try to make sense of what's happened. And that can come off as very judgmental, very blaming, an interrogation. So it may feel really judgmental to the survivor. They may struggle to hear what the survivor has to share. It may, again, be picking up some of their own stuff, so it's hard for them to listen to. They don't know how to respond, so if they don't listen, they don't need to worry about how to respond. So they may push away a survivor's attempts to talk to them about their experience. And again, because of the anger and guilt and lack of control that they're experiencing, they may try to take over. They want to try to help. They want to try to make things better. They want to try to fix things. So in their attempts to want to do that, they may kind of take over and take control away from the survivor when they most need it. Again, we talked about anger and therefore the revenge that they may want to take towards the perpetrator. Often the loved ones hold that revenge more than the survivor does. So they may want to go after someone or make threats towards someone as a way to, again, kind of regain control and sort of channel some of that anger. As things go on, they may not understand why someone is still suffering and still behaving in certain ways and feel that they should be over it. Partially, it's hard for the survivor, the secondary survivor, to continue to hold the experience. So they may wish that it would be over and don't really understand why it takes so long sometimes for someone to recover from these types of situations. And again, they may experience their own secondary trauma. So their own stuff might be kicked up, or just because someone that they love has been impacted in this way, they may be feeling some of the same experiences that the survivor is feeling. So I just wanted to check in if there's any questions at this point.
Yes, actually, we had one just come in, and it says, my wife experienced her trauma at a younger age. Though it has only recently emerged in couples therapy recently, she seems to be venting the experience on our kids and myself. How do I show support through these kind of verbal assaults and the way that she's feeling that she needs to express herself? How do you support the survivor inside of that situation?
Yes, I'll answer that a little bit now, but I think we might cover it a little bit more later, and if not, I can fill in. But I think that can be really tricky, and there is a balance between one, validating what the survivor might be experiencing and let them know that you understand why they may be behaving the way they're behaving. But it's also important within relationships and within families to also be able to exert your needs and set boundaries. I think both of those things are really important. You don't want to just set those boundaries without first being validating and empathetic towards what the survivor is experiencing. So you kind of need to do that first. So you really need to recognize their pain and recognize how it might be coming up, or try to understand where it's coming from. Maybe they're feeling fear. Maybe they're feeling a desire to protect. Not sure where it's coming from, but try to help understand where it's coming from, validate where it's coming from, but then help them see how the behavior might be negatively impacting the system. So it's really being able to do both of those. That's why it's important to be able to support the survivor, but also be able to support yourselves as secondary survivors as being an important part of the system. So being able to set boundaries, being able to communicate what you experience as the impact of some of that behavior. So I hope that answers that, at least for now, and we do cover a little bit more in this PowerPoint around what to actually do to help support survivors.
And we actually just had another one pop in, Jackie. And it says, my adopted daughter, who was abused at a very young age, seems to be, quote unquote, stuck, even though she's had many years of counseling. She's now almost 20. Is this a normal behavior? How can I help her as a mother?
Yeah, that's really hard. And yes, it is really common, particularly for people who have experienced this type of trauma early on. Often they go through stages of healing, so they may not be able to go through a complete healing process until much later in life. So it might look like they do a piece of it when they were young. I'm not sure what type of support she's gotten along the way. But yeah, it is really normal. And I think later on, one of my slides has in big asterisks the idea of being patient and really continuing to hold out the love and empathy towards your daughter. But again, like I said before, maybe also reflecting how you continue to be concerned, or how you continue to see negative ramifications of the situation, and that you continue to hope for her to be able to continue, perhaps in therapy, to work through sort of where she's at in her process. Depends on where she's at in her process. But yes, it's really normal, and it can take a long time. We work with folks who are in their 50s and 60s, and they're still working through a trauma that happened when they were a child. Doesn't mean they'll be suffering the entire time, but they may have ebbs and flows of being able to do this work, and ebbs and flows of how much it impacts them. So I think being patient, continuing to show your love and concern, and also perhaps gently showing where there might be some negative impact, either if they're behaving in a certain way, or you're worried about their choices, or whatever that might be.
Thank you, Jackie.
Anything else?
Nope, those are all for now. Thank you.
Okay, great. So the secondary survivors have needs as well, and they often mimic the needs of the survivor. So secondary survivors also need to be heard. Like I said early on, this is a ripple effect. So certainly the survivor is most significantly impacted by a sexual assault, but those that love them are also impacted. So really allowing space for the secondary survivors to, again, have permission to be impacted by this situation, and also to be heard and to be really empathetic. They have needs. They need their needs to be heard. They need to be understood for what their experience is as they try to support the survivor. Like the two examples before, it's really hard to continue to support a loved one as they struggle through this process. So being really validating of how that can impact the secondary survivor. And then information and support are always important to continue to provide. So some of that information, I'm going to plug through a few of those. Some of the basic information, depending on where you're at in the process, might be to help let them know what to expect next. If they're early in the process, they might need to know what to expect with the medical proceedings, with the SANE exam, the sexual assault nurse's exam. If they're early on, they might need to understand what these things might look like, what the police process might look like, what the likelihood of the investigative process might look like. So really helping them know what to expect next based on where they're at in their process. If it's later on in life, it might be, realizing, what to expect potentially in relationships, or as transitions happen in their lives, or as they have kids that are the same age as they were when they were assaulted. So giving secondary survivors basic information about what to expect next can really help them feel that they have some tools and some understanding of a process, and then they can have some control over the situation. And with that, similarly, letting them know what some of their options are. There's a lot of options. And giving control back not only to the survivor, but to the secondary survivors can really help in the healing process to recognize that there are choices that they can make in many of the different sort of processes that the family may need to go through. We talked a little bit about the SANE exam, the investigative process, but understanding what that might look like can really help people wrap themselves around what to expect. The more we can know what to expect, the less negative impact we'll have from the experience. And letting them know what their resources are. There's a lot of different resources out there, so making them aware of all the different types of resources that are available that someone who walks into the situation or ends up in the situation would have no idea about. So making them aware of those resources. And some of the guidance that we might provide secondary survivors can be really specific. You all can read through this. I'm not going to read each one of these, but it might be real specific things. Here's some things to do to help support a survivor. Here's some things to do to not to do to support a survivor. So really, they may need a specific guidance. Sometimes people don't know what to do. They don't know what the right thing is or what the right words are. They really want to do the right thing and they're good intentions, but giving them some specific guidance can really help them think through what to do that's helpful and what maybe would not be helpful that you want to avoid doing. So very specific do's and don'ts about how to proceed, how to respond, how to engage with the survivor can be really helpful. So here's a few examples of what you might suggest that someone do or do not do. And then a couple things specific for teens. It can be really difficult if this happened to your child. As a parent, you're going to be protective and want to support them and feel like you should have been able to help prevent this. And then you might want to clamp down on their choices and their freedom. So you want to be really thoughtful about how you intervene with teens so they don't feel punished for something that's happened to them, so that they feel supported. So again, some specific do's and don'ts really can help guide a secondary survivor in how to support their loved ones. And then psychoeducation can be really important, helping secondary survivors understand what sexual assault is so that they can help understand that what happened to their survivor is something that happened to them, that they did not choose this, they did not ask for this, it's not their fault. So understanding what sexual assault is and what constitutes sexual assault can be really helpful information to share with a secondary survivor, and what consent is. So understanding that consent needs to be actively expressed, that people need to have free will and the knowledge of what's happening. So it's a real active behavior. So to really help understand, because sometimes we want to place blame where blame doesn't belong to be, and we want to, by understanding really what is sexual assault, what is consent, can help us understand what really happened to the survivor and support them as a victim, not as someone who participated in this situation. The myths and facts can be really helpful, just to help people. There's a lot of myths out there. We want to kind of believe a lot of different things. It helps us make us feel safe. It helps us understand the world in ways that help us feel better. But sort of really helping people understand what some of those myths and facts are can be really helpful. And here's a couple examples of some statistics that we might share with people. We may share with people the prevalence of sexual assault to help really recognize how frequently this happens, helps people recognize that they're not alone, that it's unfortunately more common than we'd like to believe it is. It often happens with people we know. It happens with youth more so than with adults. And just being aware of the prevalence sort of helps people recognize that this is unfortunately not a unique situation, and there's other people who experience this, and therefore you can get support and not be alone with the situation. And then helping people understand some of the myths out there. Here are some various myths and facts that might be helpful for people to talk through. Like, I was going to have you all chime in and tell me if you think these are myths and facts, but I'm not quite sure how to do that on a webinar. But people always recognize when they've been sexually assaulted. That's a myth. People often don't understand what's happened to them. It's really confusing. They take on the blame. So to really recognize that people sometimes themselves are confused about sexual assault. So for secondary survivors to know that can help them support their survivor in their confusion. The fact that sexual assault is often the result of a miscommunication or a mistake, that's a myth as well. People are really generally quite calculated about choosing to sexually assault someone. There's often a lot of grooming behavior. So helping people really understand that this was a choice that a perpetrator made, not something based on what the victim did. There are myths out there that women often make it up, or they're trying to get revenge, or they're trying to get money, recognizing that that's a really, really small percentage of the population that does that. So more often than not, it's true, and you want to believe when someone tells you they've been sexually assaulted, because the ramifications of making this up are much greater. And the fact that few people actually spend a day in jail, that's a fact. Just recognizing that there's not a lot of accountability being held. And again, the last one emphasizes that it's never the survivor's fault. So these are just some myths. Some of these are myths and some of these are facts, but to help the secondary survivor be familiar with some of these may help their perspective and help reframe the experience for them, so again, that they can support the survivor. And then we want to talk about the impact of sexual assault, so really helping the loved ones know what their loved one might be going through. So if you understand the impact of trauma, you'll better understand why maybe it takes a long time. What is the difference between a normal stressful experience versus something that's really traumatic? When something's really traumatic, it changes our worldview, it changes our physiology, it changes us in significant ways. So to really recognize the significant difference between a normal stress and a traumatic stress can be really important so that we can be empathetic to what our loved one's going through, understanding how it impacts the brain. Recognizing that there are some significant physiological changes that occur as a result of trauma that impacts your capacity to stay calm, to regulate your emotions, impacts your capacity for memory and linear thinking at times, and cognitive capacity. You may be more forgetful, you may not be able to pay attention. So these are all real physiological changes that are happening in the brain that can affect how you're behaving, how you're thinking, how you're remembering things. So the more we can understand that, the more we can kind of hold compassion and understanding for what our loved ones might be going through. This lovely spelling error here, but understanding how the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system works, where we have an automatic response for fight, flight, and freeze. We're often familiar with the fact that we might fight or we might flight. So we might fight up against something that's attacking us, or we might run from something that's attacking us. But survivors of sexual assault will often freeze, and they just play dead, if you will. It's a physiological survival mechanism that's really important to understand, so we can understand why someone did not fight back, why someone was not able to scream out, why someone was not able to do things that we felt that they should have been able to do. This can be confusing to people who don't recognize the real sort of natural response of a freeze response. The survivor might be confused about that as well. So understanding the neurological impact can be really important. And again, understanding how the stress response works. So some people might be really hyper-aroused, where they're really activated, and they're really nervous, they're really frustrated, they seem really irritable. Other people may seem really shut down or really zoned out. So recognizing that people who have been impacted by trauma may have this whole range of experiences that go along this continuum of hyper and hypo-arousal, and that their capacity to tolerate stress may have shrunken. So their window of tolerance is what we call that, may have been reduced so that they are no longer able to tolerate stress and distress of the world as well as they were before. So they may quickly become hyper or hypo-aroused. So understanding how that all works can be really important information in supporting your loved ones. And then understanding the way that survivors cope with what's happened to them. So they may, these are some of the symptoms that a survivor might experience, and understanding them as ways to cope with some unbearable experiences. So they may have some real classic post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms. So they may be really having a lot of intrusive thoughts, where they're having nightmares, they're having flashbacks, they can't get the images out of their mind or the thoughts out of their head. They may be really hyper-aroused, like I said before, where they're responding really quickly to small things. They seem sort of on pins and needles all the time. Or they may be starting to shut down, where they're starting to withdraw from the world. Because some of the symptoms are so difficult, they may start to withdraw. Some of the reminders out in the world are too painful, so they start to kind of withdraw from people, they withdraw from themselves, and they start to constrict their lives. And then they may become dissociated, where they're really disconnecting completely from their experience, from the moment, and it's a survival mechanism to manage some unbearable experiences. So recognizing a whole range of symptoms that people might be experiencing is really their way to cope with some really unbearable distress. And then sometimes, particularly after time has gone on and you're not able to get the support that you need, or you're not able to recover, or perhaps because something happened when you were much younger, we talk about people engaging in tension-reducing behaviors, whether that's self-harming behavior or substance abuse behavior or eating disorders. Those are really common ramifications of sexual assault. Again, these are all ways, because they're really effective ways, to help mitigate the impact of what you're experiencing, because what you're experiencing is so intolerable. And because of their experience, their sense of themselves might be really impaired. They don't trust themselves. They feel worthless. They feel violated. They feel dirty. So they're really struggling with a sense of self. Their sense of worth has been diminished, so they're really feeling kind of crappy about themselves. And consequently, they also might have difficulty in relationships, because this is an interpersonal trauma that people may really be confused about how to read social cues, about how to trust someone. For more likely than not, this has happened by someone they trust. So their sense of believing that people are trustworthy can be really damaged. Capacity to be intimate, and never mind sexual, in a relationship, again, can be really compromised, because it can be really scary, and may trigger a lot of the memories and feelings of the trauma. A few additional ways that people have been impacted. We talked a little bit earlier about the impact on the brain. So recognize that they may have memory impairment. So they may struggle to remember what happened to them. They may struggle to remember pieces of it at different times. The story may change as different pieces of the information come to them in different ways. And that's all because of how the brain sort of digests this information, and how it gets logged in the brain may have gotten really impacted, so that the memory of the situation gets really confusing. And then again, if they're becoming a little bit checked out and dissociating, they're not attending to things, you're not remembering things if you're not able to concentrate and attend to things. Their capacity to remember can be significantly impaired. And often when someone has been sexually assaulted, there's a lot of loss that goes along with this. It could be the loss of trust, it could be loss of friends, it could be loss of places that were sanctuaries to them, loss of relationships based on how people have responded, sense of trust in the world, spiritual disillusion. So there could be a lot of different losses that someone experiences that ultimately they may need to grieve. And then understanding the recovery process. A couple people talked about situations that people had when they were really young and how it's still impacting them. So it really can take a long time. There's no set time frame, and it has different stages. So there may be an acute stage where people are really activated, maybe they're really tearful, maybe they're really frightened, and they're having a lot of emotional responses, or they may be in kind of complete denial, or shut down, or showing no emotion. So that's sort of your acute phase, maybe some of those initial responses to a real scary situation. And then later on, they may be able to process some of the information and may be able to start to make sense of what's happened to them in a different way. They may be able to calm their central nervous system such that their brain can start to get back online in a more normative way. So they start to process the trauma in different ways such that they can ultimately integrate it into a part of their experience. So it doesn't dominate them anymore. One of the things that is most prevalent is that the past and the present become really confused. So when you're in the acute stage, and sometimes even while you're processing, what's happened in the past feels like it's happening in the present. So ultimately, you want to get someone to the integration stage where they can recognize that what happened to them happened in the past, and they're not re-experiencing it in the present, and they recognize it as a part of their story, not the entirety of their story. But this process can take a long time, and people may not necessarily linear. They may go back and forth between different pieces of this, and they may take breaks. Someone talked about being stuck. Sometimes it just gets exhausting to continue to do this work, and you might just need to take a break and stay where you are for a little bit, and then maybe later you can pick up on your recovery process. So again, understanding all these different components of the impact of trauma and how people recover from trauma can really help you support your loved one. And then this slide is really understanding the system. So there's lots of different parts of the system that one might need to navigate. So these are different things that your loved one may go through. So they may have to kind of figure out sort of medical treatment. They may need to figure out what sort of legal support they do or do not want. They may have fear for their safety and need protection orders. They may need help financially to support some of the financial losses they've experienced. There's a lot of different things that are happening within the system that's really important to be aware of. You know, what rights do they have? What supports can be put in place for them? What resources can we tap in for them? What systems are they going to be confronted with, and how are they going to be impacted by those systems, and how can we support them? The legal system can be really long. A legal proceeding can take years. So understanding kind of what those pieces are and how to help navigate someone through those can be really helpful because it doesn't always match your sort of recovery process. So the legal process, for instance, might not be at the same pace as your recovery process. So really understanding how all these processes may impact your loved ones can help you support them through those different pieces. Some people can have long-term impact. They may contract an STD or some other type of long-term implication that's going to be with them for the rest of their lives. So just recognizing all the residual things that may come into play when someone's been sexually assaulted, and figuring out, therefore, what support systems can be put in place to help them through these different pieces. I want to pause here for a moment to see if any other questions have come up.
There's no new questions.
All right, I will continue on then. So these next few slides are really talking about the different ways to support your loved one. We at the Blue Bench often talk about the 3 E's as a way to remember some of the components that can be really important. So it's important to emphasize, empower, and educate. So if your loved one's been impacted by sexual assault, you want to do the best you can to empathize with the pain they're experiencing, understanding it from their perspective, not your perspective, to really try to make sense of what they're experiencing from their vantage point. So you really just want to listen. You want to be an active listener. You want to kind of give them room to share what it is they want to share, not what you want to hear. So you don't want to try to fix it or make them feel better. That's usually serving us more than serving them. You know, we want to make things better. That'll help us feel better if we're able to be helpful. But we can't fix it. It takes time. It takes a process. Really, people just need to be heard and held for how they're feeling in that moment. So we don't want to take their feelings away. We want to validate those feelings and let them know that whatever they're feeling in that moment is just right, whether they're feeling scared, whether they're feeling angry, whether they're feeling disconnected. There's so many different ways that someone may feel, and it's likely to continue to change as they go through their process. So really being able to kind of hold their feelings, and again, not trying to take those feelings away or minimize them or change them. You don't want to say you shouldn't feel that way. Just really recognizing that they're feeling exactly how they need to feel in that moment, and it totally makes sense based on what their experience has been. There's a whole range of different ways that people can feel, and it can change. So again, just being able to hold that space for them and hear their perspective. And then just being as available as you can. We'll talk a little bit later about your own self-care as a secondary survivor, but how do you be physically and emotionally available for them? What do they need from you? Maybe they need physical contact. Maybe they need distance. And how do you help figure out what they need? Do they need you to be nearby? Do they need a hug? Or do they really want some space? Or does touch make them feel activated so that maybe they don't want touch? So really figuring out what they need in terms of their physical care and their emotional care. Again, some people need connection, some people need distance. Sometimes that changes. It often does. So how do you kind of sort of be patient, engage what they're needing physically and emotionally, and respond accordingly? And there it is, be patient. Healing can take a long time. Recognizing that it really can take a long time and being patient with that process. It may feel like someone's getting better, and then they take a step back. They're reverting to old behaviors, and you're worried about what's happening, and knowing that that's normal, that people kind of will vacillate back and forth. They may seem really healed, and they've recovered, and then they have a setback. Maybe there was a trigger. Maybe there's a life event. Maybe there's something that brought it back up for them that's making them kind of take a step back. So that knowing that that's a real normal part of the process, and helping reflect that to them so they don't freak out. So they recognize that it's really normal to kind of take a few steps forward, to take a few steps back, and that ultimately you're moving in the forward direction, but sometimes we have setbacks. And then avoid giving unsolicited advice. You don't want to really tell them what to do or place judgment on their decisions or place judgment on their behaviors. Recognizing that sexual assault is about someone's power being taken away, and giving back the power to them is what's really important, which leads us to empower. So it's really important to empower your loved one. As much as we can help them regain their sense of control and sense of power, it really helps them on their healing journey. So reminding them of their own strengths and coping abilities. We don't necessarily need to teach them new ones. We may, but remind them of how they've handled other situations in the past. What resources have they pulled on in the past to handle difficult situations? Can they pull on those resources now? What do they know that they have inside them already to help them cope with the situation? So it's pulling on their own internal strengths and resources. And as opposed to assuming what you can do for them, ask them and let them know that you're available, and don't make assumptions about what they need. Empower them to tell you what they need, and do your best to respond. Again, you need to kind of take care of yourself in this process as well, but you don't want to assume what their needs are or kind of take that choice away from them. Let them know you believe in them is really important. A lot of people are confused about what happened to them. A lot of people struggle to believe the survivor. We always talk here about start by believing. It's really important, first and foremost, to believe what you're being told, and then let them know that you believe them and that it's not their fault. Again, we talked about physical and emotional support, so really respecting their needs around this. What type of space do they need? Do they need time alone? Do they need connection? What boundaries are really important for them? Really kind of trying to understand those and understand it's not personal. I know I've had people say to me, my daughter won't let me help her. I just want to support her. It's not about disconnect. It's not about the mother. It's about the daughter needing space. But it's hard for a mother in that situation to not be able to help your daughter. To recognize that the way you may be able to help in that moment is by giving them some space. And then when they're feeling ready, they may reconnect with you later because you gave them that space. Be mindful of touch. Touch can be really triggering, but it can also be really nurturing. So let them let you know if they want to be touched. Ask them if that's something that would help them feel better. So you never want to assume that, so you always want to ask permission around touch. And the last piece is to educate. Education and information gives us power. That's why a lot of the previous slides were, what is it important to know as a secondary survivor? Educate yourself on all those different elements. The impact of trauma, the legal system, the emotional response that someone may have. The more educated you are, the more you're able to support the survivor in their process. And by being here today, you're doing that already, and continuing to help understand maybe what the survivor might be going through is going to continue to help you sort of support them. And use that information to normalize their behavior, to normalize their symptoms, to show understanding for what they might be going through. That knowledge is really going to help you hold a framework that will help you understand their situation and help reflect to them that you do. And then if they're struggling to kind of figure out how to negotiate a situation, help problem solve with them. You don't want to give them the answers, but you want to kind of support them and give them ideas and give them options so they ultimately can come to their own solutions, but they may need help in that problem solving process. So responding to self-blame, so a lot of survivors may feel responsible for what happened. Our culture often perpetuates that belief that somehow it was the survivor's fault based on how they were behaving. They were out drinking, they shouldn't have been out at night, they shouldn't have been on that street, they shouldn't have been wearing those clothes. Those are all myths that we can become familiar with. But then survivors will often take that on and feel a lot of self-blame. Feel that they should have done something to prevent the situation, that they should have known better, they should have responded differently. So really helping them recognize that they did everything they could in that moment to survive an unbearable situation, that they did nothing to ask for this to happen. No matter what they were doing, they did not ask for this to happen, and that it was the perpetrator's, offender's choice to take away someone's rights in this situation. So really helping them hear you say that it's not your fault and helping them understand why you believe that. That you really believe that people have the right to make choices and live their life without being assaulted. So really helping them diminish their self-blame can be really helpful. And here's an example of some things you might say to really help them recognize that you are glad that they're alive, that you're really sorry that this happened to them. Reiterate that it wasn't their fault. You did the best that you can. Recognizing that people are doing whatever they can to survive in that moment. And knowing that people may very well freeze in those situations, recognizing that as a survival mechanism. That if you hadn't done that, you may not have survived. So really helping them recognize that they did everything the best that they could in a situation that was out of their control. And just to reiterate the importance of being patient, because it does take a long time, it changes, behaviors change, moods change, perspectives change, so really just being patient with that process is probably one of the most important things that you can do as a secondary survivor. And the other thing to do is support yourself. It's really important to make sure that as a secondary survivor, you recognize that you too are impacted by the situation. Someone that you love has been terribly hurt and harmed. And so you care about that individual and you're impacted by what's happened. And it's really normal to therefore take on some of that trauma. When people we love are suffering, we take on some of that pain. It's a natural response to caring for someone. It's not a weakness. It demonstrates our empathetic capacity. To care for someone and be empathetic for their experience means we take some of that on, and therefore we may be impacted by some of those same symptoms. It's not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of caring. So kind of being, having some self-compassion for yourself if you're also struggling as a secondary survivor. And recognizing that therefore that can often look similar to the trauma. It may have some of this, you may experience as a secondary survivor some of the same symptoms that your loved one is experiencing. So having some of those intrusive thoughts, nightmares, ruminating thinking, checking out, zoning out, being really sort of on edge and feeling really frustrated yourself, sadness, guilt, just some of the same things that the survivor might be experiencing, you may be experiencing. And that can affect us in all sorts of different ways. It can affect our physical self. So we may have somatic symptoms. We might start getting sick or nauseous or getting headaches, racing heartbeat. So we may start physically carrying on some of this, the impact of this trauma. We may have an emotional response. We're feeling really sad or angry or weighed down. So it could impact us emotionally. We can have spiritual disconnection, like not trust that the world is a safe place. How could God let this happen? So we may have a spiritual rupture that really impacts our capacity to kind of hold the same spirituality that we held before. And therefore, maybe we withdraw from our support systems, or maybe we overengage in our support systems. We start going out drinking too much, but how we interact with others may change. So again, it may really mimic what the survivor is experiencing. And so taking good care of yourself is really important. The more you're able to take care of yourself, the better you're able to take care of your loved one. So sometimes that's hard. We feel like we need to put our needs aside in order to care for them. You know, they're the ones who are hurt. And that is true, but we also need to care for ourselves in order to care for them. So really maintaining your basic self-care plan, making sure you're sleeping, making sure you're eating, making sure you're moving, and kind of staying active, and utilizing your own coping skills. What do you need to do? Do you need to take a bath? Do you need to engage in activities that give you joy? How do you make sure that you continue to bring those things into your life? Talk to someone else who can support you. You're supporting your loved one. Who can support you? Limiting your exposure to other traumatic things can really sort of help reduce the residual and sort of buildup of trauma. And then boundaries, really differentiating your feelings from your survivors, from your loved one's feelings. Just because they're experiencing something doesn't mean you have to experience the same thing. You don't have to take on those feelings. It's important to recognize what are their feelings and be empathic towards those feelings, and then find your own space within that. And again, seek the support that you need. So your self-care plan would cover the same areas that you're impacted by the trauma. So taking care of what do you need to do to take care of your physical self, your emotional self, your psychological self, and your spiritual self. So taking care of yourself is really pivotal and really important in ensuring that you can take care of your loved one. And have any other questions come up?
Not at this time, Jackie.
Okay. Are there any other questions that people have? This is the end of my presentation. Are there any other questions that people have been thinking about that haven't written out yet?
And while we're giving everybody a little bit of time to type those in, I just wanted to touch on a couple of things and see if you had anything to add, Jackie. Is that all right?
Sure. Sure.
So, in reference to that second question that we got in regards to the 20-year-old daughter, I wanted to talk about the developmental stages of growth for youth, and how this really does affect youth survivors. And as they are growing and their brains are developing, they're beginning to have more capacity to process the experiences and the information in different ways, or starting to look at the trauma and their responses in different ways. And so really we can see a shift or a different approach as youth survivors are aging. Is there anything that you'd like to speak to on that?
No, I think that's a great point. I think, there's a couple pieces there that depending on when someone has been impacted by the sexual assault, so if it happened when they were a youth, whatever stage of development they were experiencing at that time is going to be impacted by the trauma. So if they're developing their social emotional skills, if they're developing their relational skills, their self-regulatory skills, so whatever developmental stage that the trauma happened at, that part of their development is going to be impacted. And then you'll see that kind of continue to impact the following stages of their lives. And then, like you're saying, where they're at in their developmental process is going to impact the way they relate to their trauma. So when you're young and you think of things perhaps as all good and all bad, that's the only way that you can really make sense of and relate to your trauma. And maybe you're a bit egocentric when you're young. So you can't help but feel that it's your fault because it must have been something that you've done, because that's the perspective that you hold as a youth. Whereas later on, when you're have more cognitive function, you may be able to understand things from a different perspective. So yeah, the way you're impacted by the trauma is going to matter depending on when it happened, and the way you think about and process and relate to that experience is going to change as you go. So recognizing that we don't fully develop our brain until age 26 means we may have a lot of different perspectives and ways of understanding what happened to us that may continue to change.
All right, we did have another question come through, and it says, other than the immediate effects of being triggered, activated, and then in parentheses, or shutting down, adrenaline rush, fight, flight, freeze, what are the lasting effects, i.e., how will someone's life be different next week or month if they are triggered, activated today?
I mean, that's a good question. I mean, I think the main thing that happens is that they're more susceptible to ongoing triggers. So their whole system, if you will, is on a different plane. So if you're activated and you're triggered, your stress hormones will go up, and therefore they may stay up so that you continue to be, that window of tolerance I talked about earlier may be more diminished because you're activated and your stress hormones stay up because they haven't been able to regulate themselves. So you may stay amplified and activated for a long period of time, which means you're more susceptible to small things, may impact you more quickly. Your memory can be impacted sort of longer term if you're staying in that vigilant state or you're staying in a dissociated state. Your capacity to concentrate, your executive functioning, your capacity to plan and think ahead could really be impacted long term. As long as your system stays activated, then it can impact all those different parts of the brain that need a calm system in order to function. So a lot of the work that we do is try to help people sort of regulate, is what we call their central nervous system. So find different things that they can do throughout the day to help sort of deregulate what's happening to them so they can not be as activated so that their brain can function the way it's meant to function. Also helping people do more cognitive activities can help reduce the long-term impact of that activation. Did that answer the question?
I will let you, they say yes and thank you.
Okay.
We are almost out of time together today, so I just wanted to give you an opportunity to do any last-minute plugs or add any last-minute information that you'd like to, Jackie.
No, I just think, I just think it's really important to recognize how important secondary survivors are in this process. And the more we can support secondary survivors, the more they can help support the survivors, and that's going to have the biggest impact. And sometimes people are generally well-intended. They just don't know what to do. They don't know how to support. They don't understand what's happening. So the more we can use this information to help loved ones help their loved ones, the benefit is on the survivor. So thank you so much for caring about this subject.
Wonderful. Thank you so much again, Jackie, for all of this great information. And I'd like to thank everybody for being together with us today. And just before we go, I want to mention CICASA's next webinar. It will be on October 16th at 1 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. It will be presented by Pierre Barstron with Casa de Esperanza with the National Latino Leadership Network, and Mira Youssef with Monsoon United Asian Women of Iowa and the National Organization of Asians and Pacific Islanders, Ending Sexual Violence. It is going to be looking at supporting international students who are survivors of sexual assault. So please look out for the registration announcements that will be coming out at the beginning of next month. And I hope you all have a wonderful day. Please remember to fill out that survey that will pop up here in just a second. And thank you all again. Take care.